This is the first steps to a beginner's guide to wargaming. I'll cover snipping, cleaning, gluing, and finally choosing a paint scheme for my Space Marine chapter. Now, if you just want to get your foot through the door, or coming back from Wargaming Shore Leave, welcome back. Let's get started with building your models. You'll need a pair of snips, a scalpel, a file, and some super glue, or plastic glue. First off, we'll hold the snips so that the flat edge is facing the piece you want to remove. You can always leave a small nub of plastic to avoid any damage to any details. We can always clean this up in a bit. Make sure only to remove a few bits at a time. The last thing you want to do is to confuse yourself. On most kits, the part number is on the frame, we call the sprue. And trust me, I can only count in threes before I get confused. Now I have my pieces, let's clean them up. Try to be careful here. Hold the scalpel with the blade facing your thumb and the ball of your thumb against the handle, like this. This gives you leverage on the handle and the piece. Don't apply too much pressure. Start off slow and take off little bits at a time. Rotate the piece under a light until it catches a hard edge. Hold the scalpel with the blade at a 45-degree angle and scrape towards yourself. The goal is to smooth, not to cut. Now we're ready to glue. Remember, super glue bonds really fast, so there is no room for error. Plastic glue takes longer to set, choose wisely. I'm going to show you a top tip from our industry. It's a process known as completing a micro teeth. It means roughing a surface so that the pieces bond better. The benefit of doing this is so that the two pieces can anchor themselves to each other, and it makes it harder for the model to break apart. Take the file and slightly rough up the contact points on both sides of the pieces. Now apply small amounts of super glue to one piece of the model and push them together gently. No need for pressure, we don't want to damage any of the model. Now it's been a few seconds, the glue is bonded. This brand says it works in 20 seconds, but I reckon 3 is more like it. Repeat these steps to build the rest of your model. It's as simple as that. I want to paint something yellow, and Imperial Fists are the first things that come to mind. And I want to field these bad boys as soon as I can, so I want to paint them in a dialed down, yet still visually stunning method. Hopefully to distract my opponent enough to make up for my terrible tactics. This is the list of paints that I'll be using, but feel free to mix it up. This is more of a how-to, not a must-do. A Terminator Sergeant with pristine armor, ready to take its first steps onto the battlefield. Right, let's ready to get painting. I'm going to be painting my Sergeant in Imperial Fists, so I'm going to start with a nice bright yellow. I'm going to be using Skulker Yellow. This will be a all-over coat, so I'm going to use quite a lot. We also want to use quite a large brush for this, just so we can get as much coverage as possible. Just going to be as messy as I possibly can be here. It doesn't matter, because all the messy edges that are on parts that aren't yellow, I'm going to correct later on. So the first coat is not going to look the best sometimes. If we go to the AA cam now, we're going to see that there's a lot of patches, there's quite a few missed spots. That's fine, because the second coat is going to look nice and smooth. Going to correct any issues. There's a perfect opportunity to find any errors in your first layers of painting. Now it's time to do the second coat of yellow. This is to cover any blotchiness, cover any mistakes I've done, and to smooth it out into one nice yellow overcoat. Now the second coat has been applied, I'm happy with the results and it's nice and smooth. I think it's time to now apply a wash or a shade. I'm going to be using a method called spot washing. So I'm going to use a smaller brush and apply some wash and apply it to the areas that I specifically want to be darker. These are the recesses, around edges and under pieces of armour. Next I'm going to be using 2 thin coats flesh wash. I'll be applying this to all the recesses. It's a good point to make sure you shake the paint well as well. I'm going to apply enough water to the paint just so it's thin enough to match the consistency that I want and so it's not too dark. It's a good thing to maybe change the water in your mug, or probably get a water pot because I tend to drink from my pot sometimes. One good technique when you're painting is to make sure that you try to stick to one body part at a time. There's been so many times that I forget to paint a toe, a hand, or even the head sometimes because I just completely avoid one section. Try to focus on one part, complete it, just move on to the next. Right, I'd say that's shaded. Now we finish the layer of shading, I'm going to move on to the next step, but not before I wait for 45 minutes just so that it is fully dried. The AA cam has shown me some upsetting features. I've made some mistakes and gone a bit too far outside of the details. I feel like I now need to correct with another layer of Skulker Yellow, just to clean up the edges, make them sharp. This is just a personal preference. You don't have to do this, you could skip to the next step. I'm happy now with the result of my yellow. I feel good to move on to the next stage, which is changing the tone of the yellow so now that the highest points are going to be lighter than the lower points. I'm going to do this by using my next colour, Yellow Flame. Now that I'm finished correcting all the shade mistakes that I've made, I'm going to move on to my next step, which is highlighting all the highest points of my yellow with a lighter shade of yellow. Now the simplest way I can imagine doing this is by holding the model so it's just face up and you know where the light is hitting it, and identifying when not to paint something basically. Now I'm going to paint downwards so that my brush stops before it gets to a point where it would be in shade. Now I've often found with painting the vents on a Terminator, the best thing to do is to not put too much paint on the paintbrush and to move with the vents while applying very little pressure. I found doing otherwise, water tends to run into the recesses, it goes really messy and I have to clean it up a lot. For this next step we're going to extreme highlight all of the hard edges on the model. We're going to do this by mixing white and yellow, just in any combination, anything that will match what you want the model to look like. And we're just going to highlight the hard edges on the raised parts and anywhere you want to draw detail and attention to. A way to think about it is that it's the car headlights hitting on a street sign. The edges of the street sign will light up as bright as they possibly can be, and this is the effect we want to achieve. For this step we will use White Star and Yellow Flame. We're going to mix them in about 50-50, so let's go. Make sure to shake the paints as well. Now I'm going to be painting the ivory tones and the white tones. They're all going to be the same, but because they're separate, they're going to look different. This will count for the Crux Terminatus on their shoulder and the knee, and the Purity Seal on the side, on the leg, and also the medallion that hangs from the belt. I'll also paint the faceplate bone white to match the other helmets in my squad. First I'm going to be starting off with an ivory tusk. This will just be the base layer for my white. Forgetting to shake my paints again. Now the ivory tusk is down, and on top of the yellow, it already creates a nice highlight, in contrast with the already yellow highlight that there is. Now I'm going to put a wash over the ivory. I'm going to go for a flesh wash. Keep it the same as the yellow. I want to stay warm. I want to keep the colours nice and hot. Now that the flesh wash is down, it turns the ivory bone into a nice warm texture. If we ignore the next stage of cleaning up the parchment on the Purity Seals and on the medallion, it will keep the material looking like a papyrus. If you look at the AA cam now, you'll see the warm tones being represented on the ivory bone. Next up is we're going to do some cleanup on the Crux Terminatuses and on the faceplate. We're just going to do this again with ivory tusk. Now that I've cleaned up the Crux Terminatus, I'm going to go back in and look at the parchments, and I'm just going to edge highlight them like I did with the yellow, but instead of covering the surfaces, just do parts of it, and that will be the parchments finished. Ivory tusk cleanup has been done, and the parchments have been finished. Time to move on to the next step. To highlight with the White Star. Just going to do this on the Crux Terminatus and on the faceplate. Optionally, you can extreme highlight on the parchments, but it doesn't really need to be done if you're in a rush. Now that the white highlighting is done, the Crux Turbinatus and the faceplate are looking good. Next we're going to move on to black, and I'm going to use that as the contrast to make the yellow pop. I'm going to be using Doom Death Black for the next part. Make sure you shake your paints well. I'm going to be using an extremely small brush for this part, because I've got to be very delicate not to get any of the black on the yellow, otherwise cleaning it off will be quite difficult, unless you're really fast. So I finished the first layer of black. There are a lot of problems, can't lie about that. Had to cover it up a bit with some wet brush, dry brush action, but I'm hoping that the AA cam doesn't pick up too many of my problems. I'm going to move on to a simple edge highlight now for the black. I'm going to be using Gravestone Blue. I don't want to have too much detail on the black because I want the yellow and the bone to be more of a object to look at. Super simple black highlight finish now. Just enough to make the black look like it's separate from other pieces of the armour. There will be more painting tips from AA Games.